So finally, is Holmes a game you see working as an instance of the crawl as diagrammed at Adept Play? I kind of do. I actually, if for lack of a better word, and I don't know if this is a direct influence, and I'm not going to say it was. Holmes was very, very active in alarms and excursions, which is, I'm beginning to realize, kind of the primary culture of fantasy role playing. As conceived in the mid and late 70s, if not beyond. And so directly or indirectly, it seems pretty clear to me that he's looking at, whatever it is that we're going to call this 1974 thing, plus the few supplements, not the whole range either, but the few supplements that are out at that point. And, Arneson's saying this about Blackmore, and Gygax is saying this about Greyhawk, who knows what. And he's just like, okay, well, look, this is what I do. This is how I play, and me and the kids have a lot of fun, so I'm going to do this. And it's a lot like Tunnels and Trolls. It's a lot like it. We step into the dungeon. We got our stuff, and we're going to, cope with what we find down here, and we're going to end up with, loot, and we're going to end up with, wounds and stuff like that. Now, I'm looking at Holmes the text. I am not looking at the range, and I think rather, thoroughly disorganized set of play materials that are associated with it. I don't care how much people love it, but it's a mess. I've got some of them right here in Fox, right here. Let's take a look. And worthy of pointing out something too that you may not be aware of. Okay, so In Search of the Unknown by Mike Carr, Dungeon B1, right? It's very typical of those early modules, and is not that different from some of the giant stuff and whatever. But it's a little bit of it's a little bit of fairly nuanced possibility for encounter, but they are often very strategic, which is very suitable. Remember what I was just talking about? Is the content, could I get all story now about it? Well, yeah, I can and have with plenty of these. Particularly happy with the Slaver's Stockade and the A2. But the point is that with this, I do definitely think that the crawl is at work. It's even, and if you want to go by the language, it's all about this is a good challenge for characters of this level, per level of the dungeon that they provide. It's very much, okay, can you take this? How are you going to do when you hit this stuff? And the others, interestingly enough, and this actually gets a little iffy because these were in the box when I got it, and it's a secondhand box. And the question really, one is a solo adventure for characters level 1 to 10. Even though it says it's a basic thing. Well, this is probably coming from Moldvay. And what's kind of interesting by these, by people named Grubb and Cook, right? No strangers here. What's real fun and interesting about these is how they're built with blank spots. See? Most of the module is blank. You're supposed to write it in yourself. You're supposed to make this your module. Both of them. You didn't know that, did you? I bet. Oh man, look at this. How about today? I published one of these, and it looks like this, right? Yeah, that'll go over well. Hey, old schoolers. Screw you again. So, here's the thing. Yeah, I do think it is that way. And if we look at Holmes as such and not get all sort of, hyperventilating, getting onto Moldvay, which everybody does, we've got levels 1 through 3. We've got that stuff in the book that's right there. And if you do, as I did and enjoy doing, take these kinds of maps. This is Dyson's Delve, actually. and take it all the way down, right? Look at me, my little color coding, right? See? Yeah. That's what I do with these maps. And so, oh, look, I even drew this. Cool. God. Who knew I was good at this shit? Right? There's the side view, right? So yeah. I get tunnels and trollsies about it. Because it works really, really, really super well for it. And I don't think it pretends to do anything else. I don't think one needs to do anything else. I don't think we need to say, well, it's Dungeons and Dragons. It should be able to do the town. It should be able to do, fantasy conflict and, all this. Don't lie, man. Let the fun be the fun. Okay, so that's my take on that one. So Christopher asks, I really enjoy the rules for taking turns and pulling in enemies in a clash in Circle of Hands. Thank you. I do too. Could you say something about the process on how you ended up there? Influences, inspirations, different takes on those rules. Wow. It's a two-step process, of course, because the first step was back in the early 90s when I wrote Grey Magic. The deeply heartbroken attempt at some fantasy. And there's some really interesting things here. First of all, I had been sort of struggling with this notion of clashes for some time, which actually goes back to Holmes, right? First thing you do in a Holmes conflict after after you sort of do the group initiative and arrow flight and the spells going off at a distance, all the rest. But when everybody's just like nose to nose and everybody, this person's hiding behind the pillar, you know who's fighting with whom. And you just treat each little knot as its own little unit. And you can see that in Sorcerer 2, which at this point, when I was writing Grey Magic, was not doing that. At that point, when I was writing Grey Magic, I was still kind of musing with the Cyberpunk interlock system for the concepts in Sorcerer and Sword. Anyway, so therefore, for Grey Magic, I was really thinking very much back in terms of Holmes, not in terms of the melee sequence, which was purposed into the Champions method and GURPS, and that's actually what I had the most experience with, and it was very deliberate on my part to say, let's get away from my habits and my training, my most primary training about this. Let's breathe deep and go to the stuff that I remember from way back when and that were actually kind of interesting in this regard. Yeah, okay, what if we just split it up into all these different little clashes that are happening kind of independently and resolve them in a crunch, right? And they crunch into one another, who's ever involved in that clash. So I did think a little bit about melee in terms of engagement, the engagement rules, which, basically you're sticky, right? If someone's in your front hexes, they're kind of stuck. They have to do special things to get out of them. And another one is the idea of how do you know you're in a clash? Well, because somebody has arrived at there and stuck you in their front hexes. So taking those principles and keeping the kind of loosey-goosey where everybody is without hex maps and counting, hexes to run on from Holmes, and recognizing that once you're stuck in one of those little knots that you're not getting out unless you do something specific to get out. That's really where it comes from. And that shift in my thinking for this game, Grey Magic, in the early 90s is significant because that's not what I had been doing for the last 6-7 years. A lot. Okay, so I can see that that's where it kind of came from. But then there's these other interesting things about timing. Magic the Gathering being an enormous influence on Grey Magic, you can definitely see that in terms of pumping brawn for the conflict between spells. And much later in the course of writing Circle of Hands, I found myself looking, remember, there's that point and there's the essay in the back about when I shifted to suddenly realizing that brawn was, the guts of the system. And I said, all right, I will take a look at this. Okay, now where did I get this notion that you could pump some brawn and pop to the front of the the line, I'm pretty sure there's some influences there, and there could have been a lot of things. I'm inclined, I don't know if it's in it, but I'm inclined to go back and look at the game from the mid-90s called Sun and Storm. Don't know if it's there, but there's a lot of that kind of, effort-based alteration of the system in there, and wondering if that was it. Forge Out of Chaos had the pumping brawn, in the Clash and the Magic, very much probably also inspired by Magic, that parallels what I had earlier done in Grey Magic. And a few other things. I mean, I'm certain that there are other systems in which you spent an energy-based resource and changed your position in the order. And I'm not sure I can properly identify all of them, and be fair. Those are a couple of, that was just a candidate. I don't even know if it actually is a candidate, but at least thinking about personal energetics, I know Sun and Storm was at least involved in me thinking about that. It also relates to pushing, my experience with pushing endurance and champions, although that doesn't change position in the order. But you can see that I've always really been interested in this business of expending personal energy reserves to shift up something. And who knows, maybe I actually sort of generated that myself in Circle of Hands, and I was thinking about all the things that Brawn should be able to do. Or maybe there was some direct influence that I'm not quite flashing on what was precisely, what was actually precisely the thing. Okay. Hopefully that's enough. Now, what else do I have in here that's of some interest? Who knows? Maybe some of that spending of physical energy. Oh, right. Well, remember, in the fantasy trip, in Wizard specifically, you the strength, as it was called, was both your fuel for spells and it was your damage. In other words, you spent some of you spent hit points, right, to cast spells. Now, in practice, that turned out to be such a death spiral that it's no surprise that they split them apart in GURPS so that you have health and you have strength, and you spend strength points for magic and you spent health points, or you took damage for health points. That comes from Tunnels and Trolls. I can see why they did that, but as you can see, in Grey Magic and then later in Circle of Hands, kind of almost in spades, I was like, no, let's go back to that. Let's see if we can make that a crunch and not a spiral. Spiral for get if we bound out bad bounces, but anyway, so those are the components that went into those rules about the clashes and pulling people into them, and which is just language for engaging, really. And then also tying it to missile shooting as well, that you, upon targeting somebody, they are technically in a clash, and have some of the options, like the defensive ones. So, okay, I think that covers that. And then finally, we have Ross's question that concerns Nine Worlds. I totally missed my cue on this. I'm a terrible director. I was supposed to hold up Circle of Hands, and earlier I was supposed to hold up Sorcerer, right? Well, so Ross, so wondering if you could talk about distribution of authorities, especially backstory authority in Nine Worlds, based on your previous experience with it. What worked well? Were there any stumbling blocks? Okay, so specifically backstory authority is Ross's concern. I think he says that all the other ones make perfectly good sense to him. The game is very clear, and I agree. It seems, okay, to use the example from one of the games that I posted about many, many years ago, in which the Golden Fleece was revealed, or it was established that it is, as an object, worthless and is just serving as sort of a symbolic center for all of these investments and all of these securities and all of this financialization and all kinds of, rather significant, policy decisions and power plays and, battles and stuff. But as an object, it ain't much. And so Ross says, it seems like play has been pretty obviously building to this reveal for a while, and so of course that was the narration. But my feeling about the game is that if at that point the player, having won the final narration, had instead said, and no one is more surprised than Manto to discover she's holding a king's ransom of gold, that would be entirely legit, at least as long as it didn't contradict facts established as part of earlier conflicts and outcomes and narrations, and the GM has to suck it up like any other player. Okay, let's back up a little bit. That is a lot of inference regarding the text as I have it here. And also remember the term backstory authority, the concepts of the authorities and their dialogues about them had really not been underway in any meaningful fashion when this game was produced. And I played a lot with Matt. And we consulted with Matt all the time while we played. I actually think that's not the case. I think that narrating outcomes and conflicts is not about things like how valuable the fleece is, and that you do not drag in backstory creations as part of outcome narrations of what this conflict is about. In fact, in Nine Worlds, which is extremely detailed in terms of what conflicts are, how they're conducted, whether their effects are permanent or impermanent, and what they have to do with these incredibly important things called muses, I think it's real clear that the conflict has to be about what's right here going on fictionally in this moment for this and that, to do this or not to do it, and not about what is, what's going on out there. How is the fleece worth a lot of money or not on its own? Did this character love that character, or all sorts of things like that. I actually think my inference is totally different in experience. Is totally different. No, GM stuff, done. The game, I think, is much stronger with that, entirely stable. It says, in this way, I'm thinking this is quite different, with the way he described it, is quite different from the pool as an example of another game that explicitly grants narrations to all the players and where you always say that backstory is not up for grabs in this way. It's fair, and I think we should point to the fact that it is I who say that. And in fact, in some contradiction to the latest, the latest written document that people call the pool, which I think is compromised. Remember, the pool is a scattered bunch of documents written under different circumstances. It's not really anything else. And so when I talk about, leave the backstory out of this when you're doing, narrations are about this immediate conflict, not about what is and about, right? In other words, the example I always use, you successfully rip the mask off the killer clown's face does not mean, if you take the monologue, that you get to say who the killer clown is. You have to ask the person who knows. So I think it's the same here in this game, especially as a game which is very much post-pool and again based on experiences with the author and with playing it. And does it say so? No, but remember, this is exactly the kind of thing that doesn't get said, especially because the vocabulary for it was not in place. Looking at all the examples in play, which is a very cleanly written game, I think is consistent with that. Okay. So then the next questions, therefore, are all based on if so, i.e., did we have, backstory authority just transferring to whoever's narrating the outcome of a given conflict? Since I didn't do that, then there is no if so I can't answer questions like, well, how did it go and stuff like that. Did you hit any bumps and all that sort of thing? So I hope that actually kind of answers that question. Although it definitely goes in the other direction from where most of the question drives, because I'm throwing in a big no, right, where kind of a yes was, I think, suspected. Well, that finishes us up. You're probably very done with me by this point. Thank you very much for participating. All comments, questions, extensions, developments are welcome.